So today's video, we're going to continue on with our project repository. Specifically, we're going to focus on adding the ability to switch between different SpriteKit scenes. Right now, we only have one scene in our game, and that's the walk scene that we create. Once that scene's done, nothing really happens right now. So what we're going to focus on is adding a new class which will serve as a manager. This class will then allow us to transition between different scenes, eventually arriving at the game over or win scene that displays that you have completed the challenge in the game. Now, to do this, I'm going to be using what's called a Singleton design pattern. And before we get into that, I also want to talk on a related note about this book. This is a very famous book in software development. It's called Design Patterns, Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software. So oftentimes, when you're writing software, you'll come across a problem. Design patterns are known solutions to common software problems. So in our case, a Singleton pattern, we're going to be using it. Now, if I go to page 127 in this book, it talks about the Singleton pattern. And the goal of the Singleton pattern is to ensure a class only has one instance and provide a global point of access to it. So in our case, you've seen in the previous videos how we are constantly passing references back and forth of different objects, okay? And that is a bit clumsy to be passing all these references around. So the Singleton pattern will help us with that. It'll give us a global point of access. So we won't have to go and be constantly initializing new objects and passing on the same reference. As well, in our case, we are going to create a class which is managing the scenes. And we know that we only want to have one instance of that class. So the Singleton pattern is going to be a really good solution. It'll allow us to enforce the fact that there will only be one instance of our SceneManager class that we're going to write. Okay, let's get into the coding. All right, so looking at what we have here, this is where we left off. Last time we modified our content view so that when we initialize that content view, we're not actually doing any allocations. And we ran into a problem previously where we were hurting our performance and we were resetting our progress by allowing allocations to take place within the reset of our content view. So let's see here. We have our content view. This gets created inside our hosting controller. Hosting controller is the main point of access where when we first launch our game, this is what gets loaded up in our watch. From here, we create our content view, and we pass it a UI stats reference and a reference to the scene that we're going to use. And this is our walk scene, which we create right here. So one of the things when we add our manager is we're no longer going to need to create a walk scene and pass references. Right now, we create this walk scene, we pass a reference to our content view, then I go into my content view, and we pass that same reference over to our SpriteKit view, and I go into our SpriteKit view, and then our scene is presented. So this additional passing of references, this is something we can avoid by using our Singleton pattern. All right, so the first thing I really need to do, this isn't going to be a particularly long video, hopefully. It depends on how many issues I run into. But basically, I'm going to create a new class, and this is going to be a scene. I'm going to call it SceneManager, and it is going to use the Singleton design pattern. So I'll go and I'll add a new file. It's a Swift file, and I'll call this SceneManager. Create it. All right, here we go. We've got our SceneManager. It's importing Foundation, and I'm pretty sure I'm also going to need to import Watch Kit, and I'll probably need SpriteKit. Okay, I can go ahead and now declare my class. So, as I said, all this class is going to do is it's going to basically keep track of what the current scene that we have in the game is, and it's going to have the ability to switch from that scene to whatever the next scene is going to be. So it's going to be a very simple class. The interface is quite simple. I'm going to have an initializer, so I'm just going to stub in these functions now. It's also going to have a function move to the next scene. So this will be called by each of the individual SpriteKit scenes. When they're done, they will then go and call into the SceneManager and say, I'm done, move to the next scene. And the last function that it's going to need is one that gets whatever the current scene is. Inside my Sprite Kit view, that's where I need to actually render the scenes. So I will need to be able to say, SceneManager, give me whatever the current scene is. So I'm going to write an additional function, get current scene, and this function is going to return a Sprite Kit scene. Okay, and that is pretty much it. That's the SceneManager. So it's a very small class in this case. And I mean, that makes sense. This is a very small game that we're making. It's not going to have a large code base. So here we go. I'm at my SceneManager. Now there are going to be some variables I'm going to need. First off, I'm going to need a variable, an index, that keeps track of the current scene. So when we start the game, the first scene you're on will be at index 0. When you complete it, you move to index 1, 2, so on and so on until you hit the last win condition. So I will declare a variable, var current scene index. Okay. Another variable I'm going to need is also going to be the current scene. So I will say var current scene. Now I need to also remember to specify types here, so that is an int. And this scene will be a SK scene, a SpriteKit scene. Right, I have those, and I'm also going to need a UI stats, so that same class that keeps track of the current stats in terms of our goal and how many steps we still have to go. I'm going to also store a reference to that data in this class. So var UI stats. Okay. And for this to be a singleton, we need to have a special variable, which is the instance. And this is going to use the static keyword. And that's one of the techniques that singletons often use, is they mark a variable as static. And this variable is of the type of the class that it represents. So I'll show you what I mean here. I'm going to declare a static var instance of type SceneManager. Okay. All right, and now let's go into my initializer. So when I initialize this class, I'm going to pass it a variable which represents a reference which represents the UI stats. And I think that's all I need to pass it. And now I will initialize my variable. So my current scene index, I'm going to set that equal to 0. And my current scene, I'm not going to set that yet. I'm then going to set my UI stats. Okay, so I've set those things. And I also have to set my instance. So I'm going to say instance equals self. Let's try SceneManager. Instance equals self. Okay, So it doesn't like this initialization. Now, Swift as a language is very particular. It wants to really force the programmer to make sure that all of their data is being initialized. So to get around this issue here, the syntax error, I am going to turn this variable into a regular reference into an implicitly unwrapped optional. Okay, so that gets rid of that issue. Now I still have one more problem here. Current scene as well needs to also be initialized. So I'm also going to turn it into an implicitly unwrapped optional. Let's see if that, okay, that gets rid of my compile errors. Now, if you guys forget the implicitly unwrapped optional, what this does is it's basically a way of the programmer saying to Swift, hey, I'm not initializing stuff the way you want, but just bear with me. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to make sure that this is initialized before I use it. All right? So move to next scene. We can, I guess, begin working on this function now. Basically, when this is called, it's going to do two operations. The first one, it's going to check what the current scene index is. And based off of that, it's going to then initialize the current scene. So in other words, if the current scene index is 0, it's going to initialize, let's say, the walk scene for collecting wood. Then, if the current scene is 1, it's going to initialize the scene where we're calling for an escape. If the current scene index is 2, then it's going to show the win scene that says, good job, you won the game, okay? The second operation it's going to do is it's going to increment the current scene index. So let's go ahead and I'll write this function. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check. So if current scene index equals 0, in this case, I'm going to now initialize my scene. And this is going to be a walk scene. So let's go ahead and do that. But instead of me just typing it in, I know that this is already being created over in my hosting view controller. So I should probably just grab this and I can paste this in here and save myself a bit of typing. Okay. And getting the current device and the bounds so I can set the size, I can just do that up at the top. That way I'm not duplicating that code for each of my current scenes. So I say walk, okay, which is not, I don't have a variable walk now, so now it's current scene equals walk scene. I give it the size, I give it a label, collect wood, and I give it a goal. Let's say in this case, because we're now going to be progressing in our game, I'm going to change this from 30 to 15. And notice I'm passing in my UI stats. So I'm passing this reference over to my walk scene so that it can update those stats as it goes. Okay, so that looks good. So now let's say we've completed that scene. What would be the next scene we would have to do? So I'm going to go else if current scene index equals 1. And I'll just grab my code once again, and I just need to modify only a few things here. In this case, I'm going to set the goal, let's set it to 20. And instead of collect wood, we're going to say that this one is get to the shopper, okay? All right, current scene, walk scene. Okay, everything looks good. And then the last one, we're going to say else if current scene index equals 2. In this case, I want to show a condition, basically show them that they won the game, but I don't have a scene ready for that, so I have to create that scene. So right now I'm just going to say set current scene to win scene. So I'm going to create a scene soon, which I'll call win scene. Right, so this is looking pretty good. The only thing I'm missing then is I also need to increment. So my current scene index, I need to add 1 to it every time this runs, so that way the next time it's run, I'll move to the next scene. Now in my current scene function, get current scene, I'm just going to return current scene, and that should take care of that. All right, this is looking really good. Let's go ahead and create my win scene. That's going to be a really small scene. The walk scene, I'm actually manipulating a character. In this win scene, I'm not going to do anything actually. It's going to be an empty scene because the UI is done in Swift UI. So the only thing that the win scene is going to do is it's going to update my UI stats data for my current objective. So I'll right click here and I'm going to go new file. It's going to be a Swift file and I'll call this win scene. Now depending upon your game, if for example you may have a lose condition in your game. If that's the case, then you would probably want to call this something else and structure it so it could handle both a win and a loss condition. Okay, here's my win scene. All right, I'm going to import SpriteKit, and I'm going to set up my scene here. So class win scene, and this is going to inherit from sk scene. Okay. And there's a bunch of methods I need to make sure I implement. I can just go to my walk scene though and see what they are. So in this case, I'm calling in a init and a super init. And then I am going with a init and then a scene did load function. Okay, so I'm just going to grab those and I'll move those into my win scene. So for my init, I am going to be passing in, I'll pass in the size and I'll pass in a label. I'll just pass everything in. I mean, we can always come back and remove stuff. Like we're probably not going to need all of it. So let's see here. I don't need these textures. I don't need the walk animation. I don't need task text. I don't think I need a step goal. Okay, so get rid of those. And I am going to need the UI stats. So I will go ahead and declare that. All right. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, and then scene did load. I'm not going to do anything. That would be if I wanted to start some sort of timer and start having some sort of behavior take place. So I might be able to get away with just removing this completely. Yeah, let's just try that. All right, and inside my stats, after I call super init, I'm going to want to set the stats. So I'm going to say UI stats dot current objective equals, I'm going to say you win. And I'm going to say UI stats dot steps remaining. Okay, I'll just say 0. That means I can probably get rid of my label because I'll just hard code this for now. And I've got my size, my goal. I don't need a goal. Get rid of that. All right, that looks good. So let's go back to my SceneManager, and now I can actually create my win scene. So I'll say current scene equals win scene, and I'll pass in the size. And I will pass in my UI stats. Okay, there we go. All right, so yeah, I think this is looking pretty solid right now. I've got this code. This is really all the code I need to add. So really the only remaining thing I have to do is a little bit of refactoring. I also have to find a place where I can actually initialize my SceneManager, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's go back now to our hosting controller, and we'll start at the initial execution of the game. So this would be the first class initialized, and it comes in here, and it creates our UI stats, which is fine. And then from there, it creates our walk scene. And at this point, we know that we're not going to use a walk scene. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove the walk scene, And in my content view, I no longer need to pass the UI stats over to the walk scene. Or sorry, I don't need to pass the walk scene. So I can definitely get rid of that. I'm still passing the UI stats. Let's now go to the content view. So the walk scene, once again, we're not going to access this directly anymore. We're always going to grab it from our SceneManager, so I can simply remove that. I've got my property here, my class, my UI stats that I'm observing, so that still needs to be included. And next up, I have my Sprite Kit View. So once again, I'm passing my walk scene over to my Sprite Kit View, but I'm not going to do that anymore. So in this case, I will not pass it, and instead, I'm only passing the UI stats. Now I'm pretty sure I can also get rid of the UI stats. The UI stats now are going to be referenced in the SceneManager, and it can pass it to the scenes. So there shouldn't be any reason to pass any references to my Sprite Kit View. All right, so the next thing I want to look at now is my Sprite Kit View. I've removed a couple parameters I'm passing in, so let's open that up. And in my Sprite Kit View, we can see that basically we've got these two properties, and I no longer need them. So they're gone. And once again, the walk scene is still being used here. It's being referenced. So this is a bit of a thing I need to fix. So instead of grabbing a reference in this struct, now this is where I would use my SceneManager. So I can remove the walk parameter, and I can just basically say SceneManager.instance, and I'm now going to call the get current scene. So whenever I need to update the interface, this function here is going to be called inside the view, and it needs to access whatever the current scene is. So my SceneManager is going to return that. And because I'm using the Singleton pattern, you get a reference to this class using the variable instance, which is a static variable that I'm using. All right, so this looks good. I don't see any problems. Now I do have a few compile errors. I'll have to, take a look at these. So let's keep going. We probably need to look at the walk scene. Now what do we have going on here? Okay, I don't see any errors actually with the walk scene. So that's good. UI stats looks good. SceneManager, win scene. Okay, so I'm missing a parameter for my Sprite Kit View. What does it say here? Okay, so it says I'm missing UI stats. Okay, so let's go back and look at my Sprite Kit View. Okay, but I removed my UI stats, so I don't know why I'm seeing that. I'll just hit fix here. Okay, so it's passing in the UI stats to Sprite Kit View. Now it's giving me another error. Argument passed to call that takes no arguments. Okay, so that's kind of what I thought. All right, I'm just gonna hit run here. Let's just see what happens. Okay, so I'm still seeing a couple errors. What are they? All right, so extra. Okay, so now we're seeing some in my content view. Okay, so basically going back to, we had the same issue before. We're not actively using our content view preview. I'm not using the SwiftUI preview feature simply because I'm doing a lot of my development with SpriteKit. So it's just not as efficient. If I was only using SwiftUI, then the preview feature would be a great feature to use. So I just need to modify this. So my content view, I'm only passing it the UI stats. I can now actually go ahead and remove my walk scene from that. Right, so that should take care of that. Okay, let's just build it. Okay, nope, not gonna work yet. Okay, so my hosting controller, I still had a reference there to my walk scene, but I don't want that anymore. Okay, let's try running it. I'm still seeing compile errors, but I think I just need to give Xcode a chance to get rid of them. Okay, here we go. So it's gonna fire it up now. This is not gonna work yet. There's gonna be one step. So at this point, when it comes in here, it's crashing because my SceneManager instance has a value of nil. So I've set up my Singleton pattern. However, the instance variable has not been set yet. So that is one of the steps that I still need to do. And it's actually really quite simple. All I need to do is I'm going to go to my hosting view controller, and when I initialize it, okay, I'm creating my UI stats. I'm then going to go and I am going to call SceneManager. Now notice I'm not grabbing a reference from the SceneManager. I'm just making a call to initialize it. I forgot my UI stats. Okay, so I've now made a call to initialize it, and what happens when this code executes, I go into my SceneManager, and it comes in here, and basically the initializer is run, and SceneManager instance is set to self. So now I have a valid reference that's contained in that variable that I'm going to access later on. Now, one thing I should probably mention, my implementation of the Singleton pattern here is a very basic one. I don't have any enforcement. So for example, someone could come and call SceneManager again, and that would then clobber the current SceneManager reference. And I would have no way of knowing that that's being done. So if you look at, for example, in the design patterns book, they'll go through some different ways of setting up your Singleton pattern that gives you a bit more flexibility and a bit more security to prevent the pattern from being used in an incorrect way. Okay, so at this point, I should be able to fire this up. Let's see if this works. Okay, that didn't work. So let's start call stack here. Present scene, so it goes, okay. So it goes present scene, it gets the current scene. So that the instance is now, I have a valid reference, but inside my SceneManager, I don't have a valid reference for the current scene. So I made one mistake. I need to now go to my SceneManager, and I need to actually call move to next scene. So after I initialize everything, I'm going to actually call move to next scene. That'll then make sure that it comes in here and the current scene is set. As well, one more thing I need to do in my walk scene, I have some code that right now is commented out, and this code is move to next task. So essentially, inside my timer that's counting my steps, what happens is, once I get to my step goal, so if self.steps is greater than or equal to step goal, then I come in and I say timer.invalidate, so I stop my timer, and I call self.move to next task. And when I go to self.move to next task, I have code here that starts another timer, and this timer uses an interval of 3 seconds. It does not repeat, and when it's done, it executes this code here. SceneManager dot move to next scene. So it uses the SceneManager singleton to then get a reference and move it to the next scene. So now that I have that uncommented, if I run it, I should be able to see my game progressing through my 3 scenes and then ending. So it seems to be working. We'll see it's going to get to 15. Now one thing, I mean, my UI should be displaying what the goal is. So I should really modify that. It's hit the end. Okay, so that did not work. Okay, interesting. Why did that not work? Let's see here. We've got my SceneManager. It's coming in here, current scene. Should say get to the chopper. The other thing I noticed too was that I noticed also that the character didn't reset as well. So it looks like what I'm passing in here, I'm passing in the size and I'm passing in the stats. So based off of that, I'm guessing that the stats are being used potentially as the, okay, I'm passing in a goal here for walk scene. And I'm passing in stats. So let's see, where's the, I don't see where the goal is. Okay, I see the goal there now. Goal is 15, goal is 20. Interesting. Well, the only thing that stands out to me is I'm not resetting my stats. So, for example, I could just take UI stats, and whenever this is called, I could just reset it. So UI stats dot steps remaining equals 0. I could do that. That should at least have me see that the steps have switched back. All right, let's just try that. I don't think that's going to fix the issue though. I think I have something else wrong here. I really should reduce the number of steps. That would be a good debugging feature rather than having to watch the character stroll across the screen at his own pace. Okay, almost done. 14, 15, 3 seconds, and then it should, okay, so it goes to 0 and it's counting up, but I'm not seeing anything else be adjusted here. Okay. Now, that's interesting. Move to next scene. Okay, so I think I know why, but okay, so let's look. The UI stats needs to be updated. I don't know if walk scene is doing that properly. So when I come into walk scene, UI stats equals stats, but I'm not actually changing them. So I need to modify my UI stats for the goal. So I need to say UI stats dot current objective equals, and I need to set this to the goal. And UI stats. Okay, step remaining. I am setting step remaining, but I wasn't setting the. Okay. Let's look now at my Sprite Kit view. So I'm going scene.present scene SceneManager.instance.getCurrent scene. Okay. All right, looks good to me. I mean, I think this should work. But I worry that something is still going wrong. Okay, I'm going to set that to 5, and I'm going to set that to 7. Oh, I have a compile error, syntax error. Current objective, I can't assign a value of type int to type string. Okay, goal is, okay, label. It needs to be label. There we go, label, okay. Darn it. Okay, let's just try running that. Just pretend that's not happening. Go, he's moving a little faster. Okay, get to the chopper. Okay, so it's looking a bit better, but for some reason that new scene is not resetting the step count. All right, so that bug we were having, it turned out to be quite a good one. It took me a little while to figure it out. So essentially what was happening, well, what is happening, I haven't put in the fix yet. Inside the Sprite Kit view, this update WK interface object, this code needs to be called to get the latest scene. And essentially this was never getting called. So even though we were modifying the UI stats, both the remaining steps and the current objective, it didn't trigger this call, and that's very, very strange. It wasn't very obvious to me why that was happening. The code looked correct. So essentially, this is what appears to be the cause. The Sprite Kit View is not containing a reference to the UI stats, and it needs to. The Sprite Kit View, if I go back to my content view, this is the actual view that I'm rendering, okay? So for the connection between the UI stats and the content view to work, one of the views has to contain that data, that UI stats data. And in this case, it just simply didn't. When I made my change, I took the UI stats and I gave them to the SceneManager, which is fine. The SceneManager can certainly have a reference to it, but the SceneManager isn't a Swift view. It doesn't represent the UI. So the connection was broken. So essentially what I need to do is I just have to go to my Sprite Kit view, and I'm going to have to add a UI stats variable. Once that's done, I'm going to go to my content view, and I'm just going to place this, this parameter inside my initializer. All right. Okay, so at this point, I can now run this. And now when I modify the UI stats, the content view is going to receive the message that it needs to redraw itself, which will cause the Sprite Kit view to run that function where it then grabs the new Sprite Kit scene. And we're seeing that right now. So now we're on the second scene, get to the chopper, and then the last one is coming up, you win, okay? All right, so we've now made another big step in the repository code where we're able to now switch between different scenes. So the only probably big piece of content left that we have to do is to add in the ability to swap into a special scene midway through another scene. So for example, if my task is collect wood and I have 30 steps, based off of a random timer, I could interrupt that scene and have, for example, a bear chasing me, and I have to take 20 steps in a short period of time to escape the bear. So that's really the last piece of kind of functionality that needs to be added to our project. As well, of course, as I've mentioned, you still have to add in the correct assets and basically set them up in your Xcode project and in your Sprite Kit scenes. But I'm leaving that exercise completely to you. So I may do one more video where I will go over how to do the special event. But I probably am not going to go into that much detail in that. I might just sort of skim over that and not actually give you that code because I want you guys to write that yourselves. All right, well that's going to conclude this video. All right, I'll see you again. Bye.